Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. We're going to be exploring the challenges faced by Eurostar, how these can be overcome, and why this is particularly important for reducing emissions from international travel, the Eurostar's role as the green link to Europe. I'll give a little scene setting, then hand over to hear from our fantastic panel, and that will be followed by a Q&A. So please do put your questions into the Q&A, which you can find on Zoom on the bottom of the screen. There is also a chat function. Please do feel free to use this as well to talk to other attendees. But if you have a question for the panel, then please do make sure you put it into the Q&A function, or we might not see it. If you want to tweet along as we go, then we're using the hashtag together for Eurostar this evening. And so just to make sure you all know that we'll be closing the meeting by 8 p.m. So a little bit of context. We've all been constrained in where and how we can travel since the start of the pandemic. And of course, this has had a major impact on the number of people using the Eurostar for work or for leisure. In March 2021, Eurostar borrowed £400 million and received a cash injection of 170 million from its owners, and then again in May 2021 to the tune of about 250 million. So who owns Eurostar? Well, more than half is owned by the French state railway Sncf, and 5% by the Belgian railway Sncb, and then about 40% is owned by Hermes and a Canadian pension fund. The UK sold its stake in Eurostar in 2015. So when the lockdowns began, Eurostar had to reduce from 20 trains to Paris a day to 1 train a day. And since getting the new financial deal in place in May, it has ramped up to 3 trains a day. It hoped that in having a good summer, it could try and recoup some of the losses and plan to ramp up further. But at the moment, it's currently frozen those plans to ramp up, and talks are taking place between the company and the recognised trade unions regarding what happens when furlough ends in September. So for those that don't know, 70% of Eurostar staff are based in Britain. That's about over 1,000 jobs of over 1,000 direct employees, but also a further 2,000 that rely indirectly on the company. And yet the government has currently no plans to support the company or the staff, despite having offered generous bailouts to aviation. So all 3 of the rail unions have united together under the same banner to call for Schatz, the Transport Secretary, to take charge of the situation and give our Eurostar workers some reassurance that their jobs and their skills are valued. They're linking up with Friends of the Earth to make this case and are calling for the government to support Eurostar now or suffer the consequences in terms of the climate crisis. So again, a little context on that. In 2019, Eurostar ran 80% of journeys between London and Paris and Brussels, and replacing Eurostar with airlines would add 580,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year, which that would be about 60,000 short-haul flights a year. So it has a significant part to play in reducing the emissions from transport. As we know, it's one of the largest emitting sector is transport. So a hugely important role to play. So we have 5 panelists today. The first of whom is Mick Lynch. Mick is unable to stay for the whole meeting, so he'll be speaking for a little bit longer at the beginning of this panel discussion, and then unfortunately he has to leave a little bit early. So if you do have a question for Mick, do please add it into the Q&A promptly. That would be fantastic. So just to introduce Mick, he was elected as General Secretary of the RMT Union in May of this year. RMT is the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers. He started his work in the rail industry at Eurostar and founded the Eurostar branch at RMT. So I'm really pleased to welcome you this evening, Mick, and I'll hand over to you as the first of our panelists.
Well, thank you, Becca, and thanks for everyone for turning out at the end of I'm sure it's been a long day for everyone, and thanks to the TSSA for putting the meeting together and everyone that's participating. Yeah, I've got to declare that interest. I worked at Eurostar for 22 years as an electrician engineer, looking after the trains at the depots. You know, and I've got a lot of friends there. We've got a lot of members working on the Eurostar service, 1,200 members we've had. And so I want to see it survive. You know, there's a bit of self-interest. I want my members to have a job. These are good jobs, by the way. All three unions can be proud of the job they've done in negotiating a good set of terms and conditions, a good set of pay ranges, and all the rest of it. And we're not embarrassed about that. And we want to save good jobs in a part of the green transport economy. And that should be an ambition for all of us. We don't want a race to the bottom. And we want to preserve this situation. Now, the situation at Eurostar, as far as I'm concerned, is that there's a great business and a great service struggling to get out from under the COVID pandemic. If the pandemic had not come along, Eurostar would be looking and was looking at an ongoing expansion, improvement in service, improvement of timetables, and indeed an extension of services further into Europe, which would have gone to support the carbon issues down to the south of France, into Germany and all the rest of it. So it is COVID, to use a pun, that has derailed this service entirely. And so we've got to save it. You know, how we go about that, I think, is through a broad campaign using our friends in the campaigning groups, in the environmental sections, the people that are interested in transport, people that are interested in connecting communities. And I think it's one of the things that's really important in the post-Brexit world that we're now in. We don't want to see that tunnel metaphorically or physically blocked up with a distinction between the UK side and the European side and any of these divisions that may come around. And I think Eurostar is absolutely vital. Now, we have our disagreements with Eurostar, but it's a great service. It brings communities together, not just businessmen. There's a lot of business people use it. That's fine. But the range of fares they offer do allow working people in Paris, in Brussels, in the Netherlands and beyond to access their families, have the cultural exchanges we all want to participate in, and quickly connect a whole range of communities together. And that's something that we should throw into our campaigns, as well as just the straightforward green agenda, which will be prominent, because I think it's a really important issue. And we cannot fall into this trap, which Shaps and others in the Commons have unfortunately got into. That's a French company. It's nothing to do with us. That's absolute nonsense. They chose to sell their share for a handsome profit. So they've sold the family silver. And now that the family's on hard times, they're saying, well, there's nothing we can do to help. So we've got to make sure that business, which is resilient, by the way, we've had trouble before. We had the Channel Tunnel fire back in the 90s when the business closed, I think, for 3 or 4 months. At that time, people thought it was going to fail then. It came back and got stronger. We've had 2 channel fires. I forgot about the second one, actually. The second one was a bit less serious. We had the terrible terrorist atrocities in London, Paris, and in Belgium, which caused severe declines in passenger traffic. Naturally, at that time, people get worried. But again, the resilience of the business showed through, and people come back to the service. Now, I'm absolutely certain that if we can preserve this business and get it out to the other side, build a financial bridge across COVID, as what we said to Grant Shapps and the Rail Minister, that if they play their part, the British government, in preserving this, we can get this business back on its feet. It can then start providing those vital services, and it can start paying its taxes, like any other business does in our society. So we've got to remember all those factors, what it's there for, what it achieves, the investment that's already gone into it, billions and billions of pounds. I wouldn't like to put a thought on how much money is actually being spent on HS1, on the tunnel itself, on the second generation of rolling stock that we've paid for, that the taxpayer has contributed to. All of that has got to be preserved so that we can go on providing those great services and those great jobs. So what I'm looking for, my trade union, I'm sure the other unions will agree, is a broad-based community campaign directed at the politicians, getting some of the friendly politicians, don't care what party they're in, frankly, whether they're Green politicians, Liberals, Labour, or even Tories, if they want to go that way, if they want to get behind saving this service, keeping all of the stations open, by the way, not just St Pancras, we've got Ebbsfleet and Ashford into the mix as well, keeping those jobs going and keeping those communities served. That's what we ought to be doing. So whatever we can do together joining up, we will support. Obviously, I'm passionate about it as an individual and as General Secretary of the RMT, but I'm also passionate about it as a user and as a member of our communities in London and in the South East and the whole country that needs this vital service. So hopefully arising from this meeting and from other campaigns, we can build that broad coalition. We can get petitions going, we can get online campaigning, perhaps we can get some articles written using all of the levers that campaigns bring to bear. And it would be extraordinary that we're building HS2 and trying to build a high-speed train network, and at the same time the original high-speed train network is under threat of closure because of a penny pinching approach from the government. Now we've got to kick them, prod them, persuade them, embarrass them, whatever we need to do to get them to come up with a financial package, whether it's loans, whether it's grants, whether it's subsidy, whatever it is. Nobody cares really, as long as this service provides, and then it's got the ability to pay back to our communities and to the government and whoever else is funding it. We've got to link up with the French campaigners and the Belgian campaigners and everybody on the other side of the water. I'm sure we'll get that cooperation certainly from the trade union level, but our friends in the Green community over there as well, I'm sure they will join in. So let's make it as broad based as we can. Let's make it international. Mainly, let's make it effective so that Eurostar can survive and it can go on doing the job it's built up over the last 25, 26 years. So thanks for giving me the chance, Manuel and everybody, and Chris, and for the work you've done. It will be our turn next when we do something, and we'll work with you and anyone else that wants to cooperate. So for any of the members that are on the call as well, be assured that all three trade unions will be looking after your interests, and we will keep this campaign going. I'm sure it will be successful, and then Eurostar will bounce back. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mick, for that opening and really impassioned call to action for everybody here. Next, we have Jenny Bates. Jenny is a transport campaigner at Friends of the Earth and in particular specialises in climate transport and emissions and air pollution. I'm really pleased to welcome you this evening, Jenny. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll hand straight over to you.
Great. Well, really, really great to be invited, and it's a pleasure. Yes, my background is more road transport and air pollution, as you say, and aviation. So it's really exciting to be able to sort of expand my thinking and interest into rail a bit more. I have to declare interest too, just simply that I love Eurostar. I love being able to get on at St Pancras and get off at Amsterdam, where I've got various relations, as well as the Paris trip we've done many times. And Eurostar is part of the solution. It's green jobs, it's public good, and we wanted to survive and thrive. So that's, that's a starting point. I might just very briefly introduce why this is such an issue for the green movement. The climate change is absolutely the most serious threat that we face. The International Panel on Climate Change says that we've already got to 1 degree above pre-industrial temperatures already. The 1.5 degrees we need to keep to, if we carry on as we are, we could get there between 2030 and 2052. So that's not long. What we've already got up there in terms of emissions, CO2, could stay there for centuries or millennia. So, it's not an easy fix. And the other big message is that it's the next 10 years, it's by 2030 that we really need to take action if we're not going to overshoot that 1.5 degrees. The government is doing stuff, but of course we think not enough. There are national targets. They now include international aviation as shipping, so at least that's everything. And then of course the whole aviation rail thing is key to this debate. and you know, they're chunky cuts that are needed. And as has been said, transport is the biggest sector, more than a quarter of all emissions in 2019, and most of that, I have to say, is surface transport and cars. And the transport sector as a whole has basically stayed the same since 1990. In other words, it hasn't cut as other sectors like the power sector have. And aviation is even worse. It's actually gone up, about doubled since 1990. So it's very challenging. The government's got a transport decarb plan. It's just put out a consultation on aviation net zero, but it's not enough. And I think within that, there is a sort of rail element to be decarb by 2040, with all diesel trains for passengers and freight being electrified by then. And you know, but overall, the government's just talking about carrying on driving, carrying on flying. Technofix will sort everything out, blah blah blah. Whereas actually, you know, there's much more that needs to be done. And you know, Friends of the Earth, we've got a much more stringent sort of target for aviation than the government, or even the Committee on Climate Change, the government advisors. So we say we have to fly less. We say no airport expansion, as well as we need to cut vehicle use and no more roads building. So obviously the main issue for this debate is really the cost, and again, for us it's air versus rail, but there's also road versus rail in the UK, and the carbon costs of rail versus air are really clear. You know, so much less carbon for rail than air, and yet the costs are the reverse. It's completely round the wrong way. You know, it can be, I think, 50% more the cost, certainly within the UK, of a rail journey versus an air one. And the aviation industry is subsidized. There's no tax paid on aviation fuel. There's no VAT on airline tickets. And this is effectively a subsidy worth billions of pounds a year. And air passenger duty, which is the only thing that is paid, has effectively gone down in real terms. And it just isn't even comparable with what's happening on road. So there are a few things that we need to do. We need to sort of try and get people away from flying and onto the goods, like Eurostar for international, as well as other UK better transport. And so one of those things is no airport expansion, as I mentioned, something called a frequent flyer levy, which would help reduce people's demand for flying, because at the moment only 15% of the people, 15%, take 70%, that's 70% of the flights, and half the people don't fly at all in any given year. So something like a frequent flyer levy would actually have, you know, be free for the first one and then ramp up with every flight. And there's support for that. YouGov did some polling, and absolutely there is support for the cost going up the further people fly, and for the cost going up to help for climate. I'm
just going to give you your little warning of.
Yeah, I'm just close to finishing anyway. And we need actual sort of support from government in terms of things like Austria have actually made it to stop regional flights within the country if there's a rail journey available for 3 hours or less, and the French are looking at the same for 2.5 hours. It's, you know, things like that the government can do. And the main thing is the jobs. You know, we can support the jobs. We have to do a subsidy, you know, a transition from aviation and towards rail. And there's so much potential in terms of jobs for rail. Friends of the Earth research showed, I think, 120,000 potential new apprentices leading to jobs up to 2025. I gather you've got quite a lot of people due to retire, so that also means there's lots of new potential jobs there. So it's everything to play for, and we need to use every measure to help support the goods like Eurostar, and help make that switch. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you, Jenny. Absolutely everything to play for. I'm going to hand over now to Mick Whelan. Mick Whelan was elected as General Secretary of the Train Drivers Union, Aslef, in 2011, and was a train driver himself. Mick, handing over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everybody who's organised this and made it possible. And we're going to possibly reinforce possibly what each other say throughout this piece, but I'll declare an interest like Mick did. When they privatised our railway, they sectorised them into what they called rail freight distribution, which ultimately became EWSI, which was the Channel Tunnel freight sector. So I have a great affinity with that line, worked up and down it most of my career, and with the people who do it. And when we talk about these things, it comes down to government dogma. There's no rationale why Eurostar should not be supported. This is something that's going to come back, that's going to bounce back, it's going to be credible, it's going to be worthwhile. But we do have to go back to that point in 2015 that was mentioned to look at why possibly they don't support, not even the argument about being a post-Brexit world. £3 billion went into Eurostar from the government and was going to be a going concern. They sold it in 2015 for 757 million, when the forecast for the returns of dividends over the next 10 years was 700 million. And that time, it was just a sale prior to an election of £62 million of public assets. This isn't about growing for communities. This isn't about creating a better infrastructure. This isn't about looking at the future for our children and our grandchildren. This was purely about the dogma of privatising everything and getting everything off of the government's books. And of course, then, we should never have a better opportunity than we do now. You know, when Mick and Manuel and I have been banging on the doors of government and every other group we can talk about bailing out Eurostar and supporting it, we keep talking about it as a wider, integrated transformation of our railway. How do we achieve Kyoto and Paris? How do we achieve the aspirations of decarbonisation and electrified railway? Because railways are like antique shops, right? The more railways you have, more people use them. And it's the people who go into long distance services that use the regional services, the metro services, and they start their journey on public transport and they finish it on public transport. And we also then saw the direction of travel prior to COVID with this government. You know, all talks about HS2 and saving money. What was the first thing that they did? The first thing they did was take out spur from HS2 into HS1. Now, if you truly wanted to offer people in Manchester and the north the opportunity to go directly to Amsterdam, to Paris, to Cologne, and they wanted to do it seamlessly, you would not have done that. If you had a long-term vision about delivering a green agenda and creating more jobs and more opportunity and making the world a better place, you would not have taken out that spur. And again, it just shows the way in which they look at what we do and what we do. So the first battle, quite simply, is to protect the jobs, protect the future of Eurostar, to make the green case, to make the financial case, and to make the long-term case why it's the right thing to do. Then it's to make the case about how it fits into our connectivity to the rest of the world. How, as has been highlighted, other countries are looking at doing their longer train journeys and reintroducing sleeper trains rather than flights. How other countries are then challenging that train journeys to 2.5 hours where replace flights, they're going to tax those flights. And again, it's about then how we dovetail into our long-term future of what we want to be. Because it's not just about Eurostar expanding into Europe. Surely wouldn't we like to see it expand in the other direction into the UK? Wouldn't we want people that travel not to fly into the UK, but to get on the trains and go in what we see is a great way of travelling to Europe, but come back in the other direction? And surely about growing that GDP, growing that economic base, and growing that for everybody is the way forward. But more simply, why would we not do it? Why is there not an opportunity for this government to sit down and say, this is what we want? Why is there not an opportunity for this government to say why they won't do it, other than dogma? Why is it not the right thing for us to be doing at any moment in time? And when we then talk about what we do and where we go, surely we then want to look at where else we can expand into. Surely shouldn't it be, how do we invest in this? How do we get back into it? How do we then have the infrastructure that we require? And if you can't talk about this in the run up to COP26, when we're going to be having all of the major countries in the world come here to talk about climate change and what we're going to do, if we're not going to be actually dedicated to what we're going to say, and we don't put rail and Eurostar at the heart of what we're going to do going forward, then we don't really want to talk about mass freight. We don't want to talk about mass passenger transit. We want to pay lip service. So the first battle is to save Eurostar. The second battle is to have a greener, better railway and a better world for our kids going forward. And I'll leave it there.
A good note to end that on. Thank you, Mick. That's brilliant. And I'm now going to hand over to Sonja. Sonja Van Wingerden has been with Eurostar since 1995. So a train manager for 21 years and also a long-standing TSSA rep. And we're really pleased that you're able to join us this evening, Sonja. So I'll hand over to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and good evening to you all. As Becca said, I started working for Eurostar in 1995. That was actually on the catering side of things. And in 2000, I joined the company as a train manager. In this time, I've seen the company grow from its infancy, from a couple of trains a day, to the successful business that it became later on. Then the pandemic hit and the business ground to a halt. During this time, most of our colleagues were being furloughed. Then the Can stations were closed down with job losses as a result. Further redundancies at head office and at the engineering depot followed. Hundreds of people lost their jobs. On the operational side, the timetable went down to 2 trains a day, 1 to Paris, 1 to Amsterdam. Crew witnessing distressing scenes of passengers arriving with all their possessions in their cases and leaving the country as they had lost their livelihoods. To passengers traveling under the essential travel rules, meaning that they were going to funerals. Couple that with what my colleagues went through on a personal level, not being able to visit family, falling ill with COVID, bereavement, etc. And now to add on that our employer is in difficulty for what appears to be politically motivated rationale. It's apparently okay to spend billions of pounds on aviation, but when my employer asks for assistance from the UK government, the answer is it's not our problem, and the employer must do more to solve its issues. One has to ask if it's okay for 1,000 direct employees of Eurostar plus some 2,000 indirect employees to lose their jobs and income over this. Equally, Eurostar employs highly skilled individuals. Closing it down is simply not an option. It's not a case of let's close it down today and let's start again in 2 weeks' time. It doesn't work like that. And as Eurostar has done what it was asked to do, what other hoops does it need to jump through, according to Shaps and Sunak? The product we offer is a sound one, and with the climate change a reality, the green gateway to Europe can and must not be allowed to fail. Can I ask all of you who are attending this meeting today to sign the petition via change.org, which is called Together for Eurostar, and that you sign it, not just sign it, but also share it via your own social media platforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonja, for that. Really interesting to hear that personal perspective brought in there. And then finally, before we move on to our Q&A, we have Manuel Cortez, originally from Gibraltar. Manuel trained as an engineer and was elected as General Secretary of TSSA in 2011. TSSA is an independent trade union for the transport and travel trade industries, and we're really pleased to have you here this evening. So Manuel, I'll hand straight over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can I start off by thanking all of you who are online? There's a great many of you. It's fantastic. It's really encouraging that so many of you have taken the time to join us. I also want to thank everybody on our panel who has been fantastic so far, and Becca for sharing this event, and of course our staff who helped put this event together. Look, our union described the sale of Eurostar as an act of vandalism. The vandal has long gone from number 11 Downing Street, but the act is now hurting us, and it's hurting us very deeply, because clearly this idea that the government cannot step in because Eurostar is a French company is absolute rubbish. It's only a French company because the government itself, and it was the same color, it was the Tories who sold it off. They decided to end our involvement in Eurostar. And clearly the majority of the jobs are here in Britain. So as a trade unionist, my first priority, the same as my other two colleagues, Mick from Aslef and Mick from the R&T office, priority is to safeguard the jobs of our members. But this goes far wider than that, because this is about being serious about decarbonisation. If our green link to Europe goes, you can bet your boots that we're going to have more carbon emissions and not less. And this business was doing incredibly well. Eurostar was doing incredibly well. Passenger numbers were growing year on year. The profits were going in the right direction. And all of a sudden, because of COVID, unfortunately, because of all the measures that had to be put in place to protect each and every one of us, the company has greatly suffered. But Eurostar will be back, and we need Eurostar back, and we need people to use our railways more and more, rather than closing the only green link that we've got to Europe. So my pledge to everyone here is that you follow Sonja's advice, that you sign that petition, that you share it on social media, that you talk to your friends, your families, and you get the message out there loud and clear that you stand shoulder to shoulder with the Eurostar workers, but you're also standing shoulder to shoulder with the future of our planet, so that our children and our grandchildren can inherit something that was better than what we had. And we can only achieve that if we come together. You know, the big question is, how do we do it? Well, governments do respond to pressure. And if we put pressure on them, we will get something out of them. I have no doubt about that. And, you know, in this country, we have to be far more ambitious for rail. It's not just Eurostar, it's the mess that we've got with privatization in the rest of our railways. It's the fact that we've just seen that the government appears now to be wanting to cut back on high-speed rail, and particularly the eastern leg of high-speed 2. It's a fact, the lack of ambition of not linking us. Mick Whelan Radley said the new high-speed rail network with the Eurostar network, so you could have a seamless journey from the north of England all the way to the heart of Europe, and Scotland, I hasten to add, to the heart of Europe. And the fact, and I will finish on this point, which epitomizes the lack of ambition in this country for our railways over a long period of time. When Eurostar was launched, there was a lot of talk about the regional Eurostar. Some of you may remember this. We were going to have trains coming from the north of England and from Scotland via London, going all the way to Paris and beyond. You know what happened? We bought the rolling stock. It cost taxpayers a lot of money. And then we sold it off on the cheap to the Canadians. So the Canadians benefit from an investment that our government had put in place to enable people from across our country to benefit from a green link to Europe. But it never came to fruition. So we cannot allow that in the future. You know, our friends in Friends of the Earth put that point very clearly. We need to save our planet, and the only way we're going to do it is to decarbonize our economy. And one of the major ways of decarbonizing our economy is to invest in our railways, and clearly not to cut back on the services that we've already got. So look, I urge you all that after today, you sign that petition and you join our campaign, you join our efforts. Let's get out there in our communities. Let's save Eurostar. Let's save our railways in our country and beyond. And let's save our planet too. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Manuel. That was, right, again, another impassioned plea to everybody attending here. We are going to now move into the Q&A section of the event. We have a comment in the Q&A from Malcolm Wallace, who says, absolutely agreeing with the need for a broad-based community campaign and the importance of trade unions being at the heart of that, and would really like some facts and figures along with sort of model letters, etc., that they can send to MPs, community bodies, etc. So that's a comment rather than a question, but I suppose I'd be interested to hear from both Mick and Manuel, if you were sort of really wanted people to take away one key point to make into a letter to an MP, what would be the one or two key points that you would be asking people to communicate to their elected representatives? Mick, I'll come to you first, and then you, Manuel.
I think at the heart of this, first and foremost, the trade union is jobs and future jobs and supply chains. We are the only country in Europe that doesn't put social impact at the heart of our procurement processes. So if we actually look at what we're going to do, it's not just about what we're going to do for the climate, what we're going to do for the green link, it's also what we're going to do for future generations. So once you lose these skills, once you lose these opportunities and these jobs, they don't come back. But also at the same time, then what is going to then be the knock-on effect of this? What will be the future of Eurotunnel? What will be the future of rail freight through the tunnel? Because the higher excess charges then might have to be demanded. And there is a deal in place to protect HS1, to protect the the Southeastern Link for a number of years to subsidise it. But what happens when that ends? So, you know, we're not going to get the future investment into these projects that we need across the country if we allow the biggest and best project that we've invested in to go. So the message should be about what's right, about the jobs, about the future, about the green ideas, and also about the connectivity. And why shouldn't we protect what we've already bought and paid for, even though this government chose to sell it off? That has to be at the heart of any communication we put out there.
Thank you. Manuel, how about, oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Mick has said, but look, the government is talking about ambitious targets for new green jobs. And here they are on the brink of destroying 1,000 existing green jobs direct jobs in Britain, to over 2,000 if you look at the supply chains. I mean, it's just the politics of the madhouse, to be brutally honest with you. So I think we should be emphasizing that to the government. They had set themselves this targets, which they ain't gonna meet if they get rid of our green link to Europe.
Brilliant, thank you, Manuel. And Jenny, we have some questions here around, I see you've put in the chat links about the frequent flyer levy already, but I just wondered if you could just give just a few more sentences of detail about how in practice that something like that might work, and also on the sort of relative environmental impacts of planes, cars and rail. If you could just say a few words about that, that would be brilliant. Thanks, Jenny.
Okay, so yes, a frequent flyer levy, what I posted in the chat box is a report from the New Economics Foundation looking into this. There's a group called Possible who've been championing a frequent flyer levy. I mean, I'm not totally au fait with all the details, but I think sort of key points about it are that what they found, their modelling shows that the highest income 20% of the UK population actually would end up reducing their flights significantly by about 30%, compared to that would be compared to a world of unconstrained growth. But at the same time, the lowest income 20% in this country, who currently fly 5 times less frequently than the richest 20%, they would actually be taking as many flights as if there was unconstrained growth. So in other words, they're not affected. It's the highest income people who would end up having fewer flights. So it just sort of puts the price on it increasingly, so that you know, it is that multiple flying that is discouraged. As I think I mentioned, there are 70% of the flights are taken by just 15% of people. So you know, it's that excessive sort of flying, and overall leisure is responsible for far more flying than business as well. So you know, it is largely a leisure thing. And also the New Economics Foundation make a point about how it is progressive in terms of jobs, in terms of projecting jobs. Largely, well, at least historically, they say unemployments have been higher away from London and the southeast, and that is where most jobs are protected. So they see it as progressive. So I don't know if that's enough on that, but yes, in terms of figures for costs of flying, somebody actually posted something in the chat box I saw, and I had something here from an article in a newspaper article, which was I think it was a witch report which was put out, and I think it basically said that for within the UK, a return flight from say Birmingham to Newquay is responsible for 156 grams of CO2 emissions per person, compared to just 27 kilograms for somebody taking the train. So that's 156 versus 27 for flying versus train. But the cost was for flying was £67, and the train was 180. So that's 67 for flying and 180 for rail. So it's completely round the wrong way. The incentives are completely muddled up, and that's what we have to redress. And so one of the things is obviously to actually make flying pay its way more, which it hasn't been, as I said, because APD, air passenger duty, hasn't been doing the job it should be. They've had basically subsidized billions of pounds worth of no aviation fuel tax and no VAT on airline tickets. So it's all been wrong that way. I hope that's enough for now.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Jenny. It paints a stark picture when you hear those numbers, doesn't it? Absolutely. There's a question in the Q&A about how Eurostar can be made more enjoyable. This person says that they found it really horrible to join queues and crowds in Brussels after enjoying really wonderful trains and stations across Europe, from Rotterdam through Germany to Prague. And there's also some comments that I've seen in the chat appearing around the sort of challenges of Eurostar in terms of their engagement with the rest of the travel industry. Some people have got some particular views on that. And I wondered, Sonja, speaking from your experience, kind of what changes sort of in terms of the positive vision for Eurostar, how could Eurostar be better if given the opportunity to be so?
Well, how can Eurostar be better given the opportunity? Well, first of all, we'd like more trains to run, then we can become better. But what we did have initially was when you were traveling back from the Netherlands, there was no collaboration between the UK immigration and the Dutch immigration system. So that meant that passengers that came to Brussels, unfortunately, had to disembark from the train and then go through the whole check-in process again, which then becomes a very stressful event potentially. So what we've done is that deal has now been finalized. So in terms of traveling, it should now all be a case of you get on in Amsterdam or Rotterdam and you go straight through to the UK. I did it recently last November, and it was actually quite enjoyable doing it that way. There was no hiccup at all.
Thank you, Sonja. If anyone else would like to sort of chip in there, do feel free. Mick.
Yeah, I mean, I was always stunned by the fact that even when we had free movement, getting out of the UK and getting on Eurostar and coming back in, was the British government was the barrier to the ease of movement. Once you got onto the continent, you step out anywhere else, you go on a TGV or a link in any other station and go to wherever you wanted. I mean, I think there are better ways. I've seen people doing on-spot checks on trains in Europe, whereby, although there is free movement, free borders, people do naturally protect their borders and checks, and you can do the checks with the technology on the train and do things in a different way. And surely, if we're going to be attractive, it's about that ease, about how we do it in an effective way. Part of the real problem in all the travel areas is the various rail directives and the various constraints since privatisation across Europe about who can do what, where and when, and different cross-border regulations. And it should be, in the 21st century, obvious to everybody that if we work together, we can do this in a more effective, more fluent, and possibly a safer way than we do it now.
Thank you very much, Mick. Manuel's unmuted. I actually had a question for you, Manuel, which
okay, go ahead.
If I ask, and then you can also chip in on the last one at the same time if you'd like to as well. But we've got a question here around the policies of singling out passengers from France in terms of self-isolation for 10 days and taking expensive tests, and a question asking what we can do to jointly put pressure on the government to abandon that policy. And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that question in particular, but also just the general impact of the COVID measures on Eurostar. But do also feel free to chip in on that last question too.
Well, as it happens, our union also represents people in the travel trade. So clearly, Eurostar is transport, but it's also part of the travel trade. It's about moving people across Europe to many people to holiday destinations. And I really did not understand that question that said, how could Eurostar be better integrated with the travel industry. You could buy Eurostar holidays. You could buy a weekend somewhere away. You could also, if you wanted, when you booked your Eurostar train, you could book a hotel at the same time. So I think there was some level of integration. And, you know, speaking from my own personal experience, the first time I rode on Eurostar, I went to a travel agent and I bought the ticket there that it allowed me to get on Eurostar and also got me a hotel for the few days I was going to be away. So there was quite a lot of integration. Clearly, you can always improve these things. And we would hope that, you know, as Eurostar has been evolving over many years, that they've got better at it. But Eurostar holidays was a central theme of what Eurostar did. Just on the other question about the COVID measures that the government has introduced with France. Well, look, like everything else that this government has done on COVID, it's either usually very late or it's usually completely wrong and disproportionate to what needs to be done. Clearly, it's not just Eurostar that is hurting from the scattergram approach that the government has had to international travel. Our members in the travel trade who sell holidays on the high street, most of them are also on furlough and have been on furlough for a very long time. The way the government has dealt with this is as bad as they dealt with everything else to do with COVID that has so far led to over 129,000 people dead in our country, the highest total anywhere in Europe. So clearly, what the government needs to do is have a rethink of how they deal with COVID going forward. Sadly, we cannot change the past. And clearly what they're doing with France is just ridiculous. It's a nonsense. It's an absolute and utter nonsense. And what we should do, and we do as a union, we've actually commented a lot on the situation within the travel trade, not just to do with Eurostar, but beyond the whole of the travel trade, because the only people that the government has subsidized so far have been the airlines. They haven't subsidized the people who sell holidays in the high street. They haven't given any money to Eurostar. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this meeting tonight. And the only people they've actually helped at some of the strongest corporations, which were the airlines. Well, look, I've got nothing against saving the jobs of people who work in airlines, even though we're going to have a transition away from their carbon emissions onto other modes of transport. But clearly, I'm a trade unionist first and foremost, and I think that everybody's jobs should be saved and people should not be suffering from a pandemic that they had no role in the making. This is a global pandemic. It had nothing to do with the working people who are now being asked to pay the price for it. So clearly we need to keep pushing the government to do what is right. And I'm absolutely encouraged. We've got 90 odd people on this call, and I'm absolutely encouraged by that. And what I ask each and every one of them is to sign that petition and to share it as widely as they can, because I'm sure that we can save Eurostar, and in doing that, we can also help save our planet.
Thank you so much, Manuel. Would anyone else like to jump in to add anything to what Manuel said? Otherwise, we've got plenty of questions to work our way through, and I'm happy to move on. We have actually a couple of questions appearing in the chat in relation to HS2. So I'll read those two questions. So one person asks, what if HS2 destructive route could be stopped instead of running trains up the M1 and transform motorways? Instead, run trains up the M1 and transform motorways into railways. So a suggestion and an idea instead of HS2 there. And then another question that that touches on HS2, which I'll just scroll down to find. So another person asking, do you think that this reflects a government view that they're not really interested in rail projects and the promise of HS2 for the North will also go? Very happy to open that up to the floor for anyone who would like to go in first. Mick, you've first unmuted, so you go.
Yeah, well, it's a bit hard not to talk about trains and drivers and in the context. In relation to the Common Belt M1, I think where we are in the UK is about 30 or 40 years behind capacity for what we require for the growing population and the needs of where we need to be. And what the actual route of our original vision of HS2 isn't what's there now. I want to make this quite clear. Our view was to start at the top end of Scotland, start on the south coast, start building at the same time, meet in the middle, and regenerate all integrated transport across the UK, and have a green and better railway. And every time someone talks about the money or the escalating costs, they take another little bit out of it. But the real thing about the route of HS2, it's about freeing up capacity on the west coast and east coast for other trains and for freight as part of an integrated transport system. So you can't just look at it as where it goes through the Chilterns or where it touches this bit here and there. It's where it should go, because ultimately what you need is a number of transport hubs across the UK whereby you have longer freight journeys and shorter electric lorry journeys, right? So the other things that you need to do. But if you don't free up the passenger capacity through HS2, we don't complete it, then we don't free up the capacity on the west coast and east coast, and we don't get anywhere near where we're going to need to be 10, 20 or 30 years now, or even catch up with what we haven't done in the past. So there is a need for HS2, and as it would be a false economy now to stop HS2 going to the north. It'd be a nonsense. I will be one of the first to say we've got enough trains going to Birmingham. But the intention was never to stop at Birmingham. It was to go beyond. It was meant to revitalise. And also, if you remember Mr. Osborne's comments about HS3 and how TPE and Transpennine was going to feed into it as well, and we were going to have a wonderful thing. But all he was going to really do was upgrade the speed across Transpennine by a few miles an hour, and it would even be categorised as a high-speed route. What we can't do is step backwards. What we need to do is look at what we need to do to embrace it further and make it better, and where it isn't going to work properly, to do it. But anything that slows it or stops it now, when you restart these projects or try to build them in future, they cost 10 times more. And then the opportunity to get back to them gets truncated. What we actually need coming out of the pandemic is green jobs. What we actually need is to pick up all those people that once they aren't furloughed, won't have jobs and need reskilling and retraining. And we're going to need not just railways, but houses and all the other things that boost an economy in a post-pandemic or a post-depression period. And if we don't do and enshrine the projects that we've got and build the other projects on top of them, right, the real issue is going to be, where will we be in the future, and where will our kids and our children be? They won't be in a green world, and they won't be in a world whereby they have social mobility or the opportunity that they deserve and the education they deserve and the proper jobs that they deserve going forward. So as Manuel said later, all of this is interrelated to the more global issue about what we want as a society and a country and the infrastructure that we deserve.
Thanks, Mick. Sonja, I saw you nodding there. Was there anything that you wanted to add to what Mick was saying? But I certainly saw you nodding. Jenny, I think Mick's raised a really compelling argument for the need for joined up services across the country. From an environmental perspective, is there anything to add in there? And also, do feel free to make a comment on HS2 if you want to, but recognising the kind of Eurostar focus of the evening.
Yes, I mean, we obviously have different views on this, and our view has evolved over time. So, I mean, yes, we originally, it was sort of HS2 was sort of mooted more as an alternative to Heathrow third runway. And I think we were of the view that if it really did end up as helping cut carbon, then that was a better option. But I think, the justifications, the business case that has changed and evolved, and the destruction and the problems in terms of nature and all the rest of it have become, more and more serious. We haven't been happy to support it for a while now. Not to say that there is an absolute need to invest in rail, to integrate it more, to do much more, particularly up north. But there's so much that needs doing that would help free up capacity by improving existing lines and doing direct stuff that doesn't just shave a relatively small amount of time off some journeys, which originally the business case was assuming was dead time for people. But I think everybody knows that working on a train is actually very productive. So, they did change the business case after that. But so, yeah, it's a tricky one, but we're absolutely behind overall integrating in more and better rail. Just that, we've had real concerns and issues over HS2.
Brilliant, thank you, Jenny. We have a question here about looking to looking to other countries, looking to how other people are responding. So I wonder, Manuel, if you can take this question about how are SNCF and Sncb reacting to the situation? Is there anything to learn from that? And also, is there anything to learn in terms of how we can put pressure on the government to invest in rail?
Well, the first thing to know is that they're both publicly owned companies, unlike our railways, which are in private hands. A lot of the time, the government just says that they're not prepared to give money to Eurostar because it's a French company. That's the way they've labeled it. Yet, most of the operators that are running the rest of our trains in our country are European companies. Most of them are state-owned by other countries. So the excuse that the government is making is really a lame duck, because they have been subsidizing. Look, when COVID hit our country, the franchising model of the railway that was already teetering on the brink just went out, completely out. That model has gone. We're only running trains today because you and me and every other taxpayer in this country is footing the bill. Yet the government hasn't done the most logical thing, which would have been to reintegrate the railway system under public ownership. Instead, what they're doing is they're allowing this fake idea that somehow the railways are privatized by paying huge sums of money to private operators to operate a railway that we own and we now fund. It really is absolutely bonkers, absolutely bonkers. So clearly, we need to start from there. We need to reintegrate our railway and bring it back into public ownership. We need to support the work that Eurostar does. And I would go further. I think we need to reverse the act of vandalism that George Osborne imposed on us when he sold our stake in Eurostar. And the government should take that stake back and bring Eurostar partly back into public ownership of our country and share that public ownership with the French government and the Belgian government as it was originally envisaged, rather than wash their hands as they're doing now and not putting what is a green link to Europe first. And, coming out with every lame duck excuse going when they're filling the pockets of greedy shareholders in the rest of the railways, even though all those companies would have gone bust. By mid-March, every single one of the train operating companies in Britain would have been bust if it hadn't been for the help that the government had channeled. Clearly, we didn't want them to go bust, but we don't want someone to extract a profit from public money. Rather than going to shareholders, that money should be used to invest in our railways, so we can have a more integrated railway, so we can have more rail services, and we can have better upgraded infrastructure. And just on the HS2 point, I don't want to have a style debate with another panelist, because that wouldn't be very fair or very right, because we are talking about Eurostar. We need to build new railways. High-speed rail is not a novel idea. It may be novel in this country, but we're 40 years behind the curve. If you're going to build new railway lines, why use 19th century technology? Use 21st century technology and build the same high-speed rail networks that everybody else in Europe has got.
Thank you, Manuel. So
can I just add?
Oh,
sorry,
cool.
Becca. Can I just add on to what Manuel was saying? In terms of what Sncb and Sncf are doing for Eurostar, they are pulling their weight. They have stepped up to the plate for the company and have provided us with some cash to keep going together with the shareholders, and also in negotiation with the company, in negotiation with Sncb and Sncf have negotiated that the track access charges would be lowered, so that was a saving to the company. Whereas on this side of the channel, unfortunately, we see no such thing. It's like, you pay full whack and that's it. And it's like, our product is sound. We have a sound product that we offer to the public. And, Sunak could say to us, look, we'll forego the track access charges for a couple of years so that you guys can get back on your feet. It doesn't take much, but there has to be the political will for, for us to survive. The political will has to be there. And so far, Shapps has been, is behaving disgracefully, and Sunak has sit on his hands. So we need help.
Thanks, Sonja. That was really helpful and really interesting. Manuel, I think, has made his position on this question clear, but there was a question, did the panel think that privatisation has made things worse or better for the rail industry, including Eurostar? I wondered if any of the other panelists would like to add a contribution about privatisation there. I think we know what Manuel thinks about this already. Mick.
Becca, we've only got 30 minutes. Look, quite simply, very quietly during COVID, the government's admitted what we had been saying jointly as trade unions for the last 23 years, the very reasons we gave why privatisation was flawed and didn't deliver for the travelling public or the taxpayer, as agreed by the National Audit Office and others, right? Shapps used those very reasons when he said we had to get away from where we are now, and we've now got to go with the Williams report. And one of the things about discouraging people, to get on a train, to come into St Pancras, jump off that train and go to Eurostar, is that you can only use certain trains and buy certain tickets to certain trains, and there's no cross-pollination. And it's been about 20 years of protectionism of those train operating companies wanting to protect their profits. So you couldn't use a Virgin ticket on a London North Western train or elsewhere. It was never about encouraging people onto the railways. It was actually about deterring people to only use certain services. And allied to that, then, we're going to go into a different area, probably away from the Eurostar debates, the deregulation of buses. You can't take 100 million bus journeys out of the country because train stations don't move. And if you start your journey in a car, you're going to finish it in a car. But if you start it on public transport, you will take a bus to the train station. You will take that train to where you can connect with Eurostar, and then you will use Eurostar for business and for leisure and for the things you should do so. So the real thing about privatisation was there are three basic tenets of it. It was meant to drive down fares. Fares increased by 65% across the piece. It was meant to drive competition. Not one privateer put a penny into this industry. No one of them built a train, and none of them built 1 inch of track. And ultimately, the fallacy also was that they only made 2% on turnover. They forgot they discounted the £3.5 billion they got by the back door before they took a profit, when they took that profit, and they never had to pay that back. So yes, privatisation, not just in the UK, but throughout all the European directives, has been not good for the travel industry and not good for green travel.
Thanks so much, Mick. And Jenny, I can see you nodding there. I wondered if there are any points that Mick made there that you wanted to elaborate on in terms of greening travel and the need for these sort of joined up services that make it easy for people to leave their door not in their car.
Yeah, we absolutely agree on the sort of joined up travel, and the point about what you start on, and that the integration of hubs and modes, to the point where we totally think we need to re-regulate the buses. Interesting that Manchester is looking at doing that, which would be really good, and obviously TfL in London. We also actually think that in the UK we need to have rail under an integrated public control, so that then everything can be much better controlled and organised. So yes, I think my colleague Dennis, who's done some work on the job side of all this that I was mentioning, has posted a link in the chat about a set of documents we had done for us, and one of them is well, they're done by Transport for Quality of Life consultancy, and there's one which is like a summary paper called A Radical Transport Policy, and that talks about some of the things I've mentioned. So you'll find that near the top, I think, of the chat, but I could re-find that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. Following on, Manuel, from what you were saying around the problems of the UK government having sold their stake in the Eurostar, I wondered, we have a question here about how easy would it be for the UK government to take back its stake in Eurostar? Would they have to purchase shares from one of the other governments that hold them? or the two private investors, and also if you could just say a little bit about what the shares looked like before they got sold. That would be, I think that would be really helpful context for people to understand about what's possible and also what's happened in the past.
So when Eurostar started, it was a collaboration between three governments, between the British government, the French government, and the Belgian government. So the three rail operators of those countries took a stake in it. Yeah. So we had a public stake, Britain had a public stake, France had a public stake, and Belgium had a public stake. Britain and France had the largest stakes because they were the largest countries, and Belgium had the smallest stake. What you've now got is that the British sold our stake to private operators. And well, private shareholders, they weren't operators, there were people who came in and bought a stake in the company. So my view is, in the same way that we sold it, we can buy it back. You know, Sonja mentioned earlier that what we need is the political will to do it. If there's the political will, there's always a way. And if the political will was there, we could do it. And roughly return to a similar ownership model that we had before. So I think originally it was something like 40-40-20, 40% belonging to the British government, 40% belonging to the French government, and 20% belonging to the Belgian government. Going on a model where it's completely publicly owned and it's there to serve the social needs and environmental needs, I hasten to add, of our countries, rather that now we have got a private investor that has, you can bet your boots, they've only put that money in there because the company used to be profitable and they could get some money for the shareholders. They didn't do it for the public good. They didn't do it to try and save our planet. They did it because they could get some money back from it. And we need to turn that model around. Look, the railways, like any other form of public transport, is a public good. And if it's a public good, it should be run in the interest of people, not profit.
Thank you. If anyone else wants to chip in, please do.
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. You know, the nature of privatisation in the UK, including the sell-off of Eurostar, has been public investment, public building an asset, then selling that asset cheap. From whether it be gas, whether it be steel, whether it be telecoms, but we specialise in the railways. So we invested £3 billion in Eurostar, and it was going to be our link to the continent for the future. And it was an asset, and it's an asset. We sold that asset for £757 million. We took a £2.3 billion loss and ended up with nothing at the end of it. And even then, as I said at the start of my contribution, the forecast on the dividends for Eurostar as a going concern would have returned £700 million over the next 10 years at that point. So you sold something for £700 million that you're going to get £700 million for anyway, and it would have had the asset base behind it, which when you're a government and got an asset base, you can use that asset base to borrow other money for other projects and greater goods. So the idea of building something, selling it cheaply and not having it afterwards, I don't think anybody in their private or other lives would work on that economic basis. And, you know, the opportunity then when Eurostar does need support, was there a deal to be done to take a percentage back in Eurostar to get that money back through dividends over a period of time? I think would have been a very good and easy option for the government to take if they truly want to protect those jobs and protect that link with the continent.
Thank you so much, Mick. There is a fairly factual question here that I'll open up to see if people know the answer to it, about what's happened with the see, there's a challenging word for me, prospective direct trains between London and Cologne, and whether cooperation with Deutsche Bahn is possible. If anybody has anything to share on that. There's also a question that I saw come up in the chat around plans to link with our sister unions on the continent, such as CGBT, in the campaign to save Eurostar. So Sonja, you might have something on that, but if you do, but otherwise, just an open question about that prospective train line and cooperation. Mick, you've turned your mic off, so I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I mean, there was no reason why DB couldn't run trains, and they were looking at it. Unfortunately, DB then had their own economic problems back in Germany and curtailed all their plans for extensions at that time, and all went on the back burner. So the idea of it happening, people were looking at sleeper trains to Cologne and across Europe. It could still happen. There's no reason why it can't happen. Obviously, somebody's got to take the step, bid for the paths, put the investment in. but Germany, as we know from some of the problems we've had in the freight sector in the UK, have gone very inward looking at this moment in time. As for working with the sister trade unions in France, more than willing to do so, and we do have agreements with both the CGT and the CDFT to work together on Eurostar and looking at what we can do.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, I saw Manuel's finger there, and I wasn't sure if he was coming off mute.
Yeah. I pressed the wrong button. Sorry about that. Just to say, like across Europe, we are seeing the reintroduction of sleeper trains, which can mean that people can do very long distance journeys overnight. We should be doing that. We should be using our green link to Europe to allow people to live St. Pancras at night and wake up in the southern coast of France in the morning or beyond that. There's no reason why that we cannot do that. But, I talked about the regional Eurostars that we bought. We bought the rolling stock at a very high cost. They were, state of the art, I hasten to add. All the sleeper compartments had showers within each room, etc., etc. And we ended up selling them at a great loss to Canada. So Canada and the Canadians have benefited from the investment that we made. And we have lost out because we're not running those trains from across Britain overnight that could have got passengers across Europe and would have meant less people flying too. So would have been good for the planet. So, we have to be more ambitious about rail in our country. And the only way we're going to do that is if we have a government that is serious about investment in rail and also making sure that the whole of our public transport network is viewed as a public good and not as a cash cow for greedy shareholders.
Thank you, Manuel. We have a question here about COP26, which, Jenny, I'll turn to you to answer first, but other panelists are welcome to add to her answer if they'd like to. So the question is, in view of the UK being the chair of COP26 in Glasgow, what can we do to persuade them to support the 2021 EU European Year of Rail? Although the UK is no longer an EU member state, they can still support things like that, support this like other non-EU member states such as Norway. So a question there specifically about supporting EU European Year of Rail, but also, Jenny, if there's anything else that you would like to add in terms of the run-up to COP and what sorts of signals you'd like to see from the government, particularly around rail.
Well, yes, absolutely. This is a huge opportunity, and if we can't use this pressure to get them to do things now, then it's going to be much harder. And obviously, some of what they have been doing is because of this COP. So they've tried to get their transport decarb plan out, the aviation net zero. I mean, we take them to task when they're trying to open new coal mines and that sort of thing. So we have to use the COP and sort of ramp up how sort of silly they look, how awkward it will be for them with other international leaders and that sort of thing. So obviously, and link as much as you can in Twitter and other things to COP, to climate, to making those links. So yes, I mean, clearly it's anything that would be adding to the problem and supporting things that would help. And so I wasn't actually aware of the 2021 EU European Year of the Rail, but that's a really good thing to know about, and I can see what we can do on that. But we're absolutely going to try and use everything we can to make a difference in these next months, because it will need massive change, but it's always about money, these big things, and wheeling and dealing with support for what they might, what China might do to support countries in Africa, and what the UK may do. And it's such a, I mean, I was at the Paris climate talks, and goodness me, they're extraordinary things. So it's certainly an opportunity, and people need to use it now and try and get everything we can out of them for that. But that's all I can say for now, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, Jenny. I'm conscious of time, and there is a question here about that need to link in the sort of climate messaging with this, and someone specifically asks, and I think you know, open this one out to whoever wants to take it, but what are the prospects of strike action on this Eurostar issue? And specifically, could this you know, be sort of put as a climate strike in combination with a trade dispute? So there's a question there, and actually, in the interest of time, there is another question if somebody would like to take this as well, which is, do you fear that the passenger services through the tunnel might be ended completely? So 2 questions there. One, is that a genuine possibility that passenger services could end? And secondly, what are the prospects of strike action on this issue? I'll open that up to whoever'd like to take that first.
Well, I mean, I'll start with that one. Clearly, as a union, we'll do whatever we can to protect our members, but I think it will be slightly futile to have a strike at a time when there's only 2 trains running from London to the continent. That's why there's only 2 trains running. And what we want to see is more trains running. And maybe when we get all of our members back to work, rather than being on furlough, we know that, you know, the furlough taper has now come in. So in a few months, many of our members may be facing redundancy, sadly may be facing redundancy. So my first job is to protect their jobs. So I think it's a futile time to call a strike when there is no demand for those services at the moment. On the other issue, it will be a terrible disaster, an absolute unmitigating disaster, not just for the 3,000 people that depend on Eurostar, but for our planet, if no passenger trains continue to run through that tunnel.
Yeah, I echo Manuel's view. There is no point in going on strike at a time when you have no leverage and it doesn't impact upon the services themselves. Also, you wouldn't want to give somebody the excuse to terminate the services because you took away the few trains that were running. I have a view that the long-term viability of Eurostar, it will come back. I see it fundamentally different to what we will see internally in the UK. You know, with the changing nature of work, we will see less commuter traffic in and around the UK post-COVID. But those people who travelled to Brussels and Bruges and for leisure and for business purposes, I don't think they're automatically going to travel in a different way. Whereas those people who did the shorter journeys in and out of major conurbations inside the UK, I do think that will take a longer time to come back. And we're seeing now even the demand for people and many of the questions on the chat and elsewhere about COVID, the regulations to 10 days and the idiocy of the government in some of the things that it does, right, that people are looking about how they can travel and want to travel. So I think the opportunity for Eurostar to come back far quicker than a bounce back in other areas will happen.
I think also, if I may add, it's you know, our crew is ready to go. The company is raring to go. We want to run these trains, but it is for that man in number 10. Sorry, I don't want to use his name. The man in number 10, I call him. You know, he needs to make a decision. France needs to come off the Amber Plus list. There is no rationale for it to begin with that it's on there. And this political spiel, what is being played on our backs, quite frankly, needs to stop. France needs to come onto the Amber list. Eurostar needs to be able to start running its trains. As I said, the crew is ready. We're fully trained. We're ready to go. The trains are ready. The engineers at the depot are doing their best to get them all ready. It's now time for the government to say, right, okay, let's release those restrictions. Let's take them off. This company can now get back on its feet. And the sooner that is done, the better it is. We've got to understand that come September, the furlough system totally ends. There is no financial backing from the government at this present point in time that we are aware of. That might change. He's, after all, the king of U-turns. He's done it before at the last 24 hours. But at the end of the day, something needs to happen here. And the sooner we can get going, the better it is. And then we can start earning money again. It's as simple as that. The way it is at the moment, Manuel said 2 trains. It's actually double, Manuel. We run a couple more trains now. But even so, we need far more trains in the timetable. And the sooner we can do that, the better it is.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I'm really keen to hear everyone on the panel's closing thoughts. So to warn you, I'm about to come to you and ask you to share your closing thoughts. I think we'll do it. We'll follow the order that we followed earlier, and I'm conscious that obviously Mick Lynch is no longer in the meeting. But so Jenny, I'll come to you first, then to Mick, then to Sonja, and then to Manuel. So just to give the attendees here just your closing thoughts, and I suppose your pitch to them, really, what you would like to see happen now. So Jenny, to turn to you first.
Okay, briefly, well, it's been really good to hear everything from the other panelists and the questions. So I think we've got everything to play for, as I may have said before. Go out, try and make the case, use social media, use all your contacts. Let's sing the praises of rail and to green jobs, and to help support for everybody to ramp that up and to sort of curtail the transport's climate emissions in this important year. And good luck to everyone. And I just, I hope for the best for Eurostar and all the workers and everybody involved with it. So good luck, and let's all try and keep working together on it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jenny. Mick, over to you.
Thank you. Can I thank everybody who's taken the time to be with us this evening? And now I want you to go and talk to 5 other people, 10 other people, 15 other people, and everybody you know. It's a green argument about why we need Eurostar. But more importantly, it's about an economic argument about why we need that traffic coming into the UK as well as the traffic going out of it. We seem to spend a lot of time today about us talking about how we get to the continent. I'm quite sure there are thousands of people, as we've seen in the past, and with the greater changes to how people are looking at to travel in future and become greener, there'll be more and more people that want to use that link from Europe. It wasn't that long ago that we were jumping up and down and praising the extension to Amsterdam and wondering where else we could go. Well, it's not just about where else we can go, it's about where else other people can come to. So there is an economic, a green, and a workers' argument for us protecting our link to Europe, and we should do it immediately and tell everybody else that we know to do it too. So please take that message out there. I do thank you for listening this evening.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Mick. And so Sonja, to you for your closing thoughts.
Thank you very much, Becca, and thank you all for joining us this evening and listening to our case. And we do hope indeed that you'll take the message away. So please help us to get back on our feet, help us to save the jobs at Eurostar. Don't let the Green Gateway to Europe fail. There is no need for it. So please sign our petition, share it far and wide. Let's make that noise, and do what we can to keep going with employment at Eurostar as best as we can. I'd like to thank you for your attendance this evening, and I hope to see you all very, very soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sonja. And Manuel, to you for your closing thoughts.
Well, I tell you what my closing thoughts are. I want to thank everybody for the contributions. We've had many contributions. I've had a look at the chat. I've had a look at some of the questions. It's fantastic. I think we peaked at over 90 people online at one point, which is great. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time for joining our meeting. And as Sonja has just said, sign that petition and share it. Share it with all your friends, with all your family. Use social media to promote it. And let's make sure that we will save Eurostar and help save our planet in doing so too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And really, thank you so everybody who attended this evening, and thanks so much for everybody for so many really fantastic questions. I'm so sorry that we didn't get to every single one of them, but I hope that that we managed to get to a good swathe of them, and with some really fantastic and detailed answers from our panelists. So thank you so much to you for your questions, and thank you so much to the panelists both for their fantastic introductions, their really honest and considered answers to the questions, and for their impassioned and interesting and really persuasive calls to action as we sort of come towards the close of the event. The primary call to action that we've had is this petition, and you'll see that Kerry has posted that in the chat for everybody. So please do go away, have a look at that petition, and follow up on social media and using the hashtag Together for Eurostar. Already, so there we go, somebody's already said they've already signed the petition and shared it already in the chat. So following Pauline's lead, please do go away and do that yourselves as well. And I suppose my final thoughts for this evening are sort of echoing actually something that Jenny just said about there being everything to play for. That, as you know, as I've heard you all talk and seeing the questions and the concerns that are raised in the chat, it's clear that this is an incredibly crucial moment. It's an incredibly crucial moment for the planet. It's an incredibly crucial moment for the UK, but it is an incredibly crucial and important moment for Eurostar. But that, as everybody's been speaking, I've been really struck by the optimism and the support and the potential for Eurostar to continue to thrive and to do so well, and to be such an important part of decarbonising transport, of reducing our transport emissions. Because I think, to come back to the very beginning of this event and the opening comments, that there is such a pressing need for action on the climate crisis, and that good green jobs are really important to that, and that there are good green jobs in Eurostar, and that the rail industry has such an important role to play in how we get about in a way that's good for the environment, but also good for us. And we've heard people talk about their love of Eurostar, and obviously people commenting on how they'd like it to be better, but fundamentally so many messages coming through about how much people enjoy the experience. And I'm one of those people that enjoy the experience of travelling by train across Europe, by being able to do that and from city to city. It's a remarkable and wonderful thing. It's a precious thing that we don't want to lose. I just saw somebody comment in the chat that we are the experts and the government needs to listen, and I would absolutely agree that the public voice on this does need to be heard, and the petition is one of those ways, and other, there are other ways, and do contact your MPs, etc. as well. But that's a really important and good note to end on, that we've heard experts from the panel, there are experts attending here, but all of the everybody, all of the public are experts in what they feel like is a good way to get about, a green way to get about, and to provide people with the chance to express that and get that across feels a really important part of what we've been here to do today. So I'd like to say thank you so much to everybody for coming. Thank you so much for the panelists. Thank you so much for everybody who's already gone and signed the petition, and I look forward to seeing you at another event in the future.